Okay. This last video I think is going to be short. I'm not going to do a full 10 minutes, but I'm going to wrap up the David Foster Wallace. One thing I will say, by the way, guys, is this is probably the last post about David Foster Wallace. So if you have any, and I mean any questions about David Foster Wallace, ask them in the comments below. If there's a word you don't know or a phrase you don't understand or anything you need help with, you gotta ask me. And take notes. Please take notes. When you're watching these videos, have a physical copy of the article out with you and take notes because you can use the notes when it's time to take paper 4, which will be about these articles. So, what I want to do with this last video and this last look at David Foster Wallace is take a look at this last paragraph again. Now, if I had you in front of me, I would make you. David Foster Wallace spends the last paragraph of his essay asking you a bunch of questions directly. He's saying, how do you think about this? How do you think about these issues? So what I would like you to do in the comments to this blog is try to answer his questions, because he's asking real questions here. So let's go over what they are real quick. So he says, he says, listen, do you ever think about the moral status and the suffering of the animals involved? Like, look, you eat meat. Do you ever think about these things? He says, if you do, what ethical convictions have you worked out to permit you not just to eat, but savor and enjoy flesh-based foods, Vianz's foods? So he says, listen, do you ever think about the animals that suffer? He says, if you do think about the animals that suffer, how do you go on eating meat? Like, what do you tell yourself to make that ethically okay? And then he asks another very good question. He says, if on the other hand, you'll have no truck with confusions or navel or convictions and regards stuff like the previous paragraph as too much fatuous navel gazing. Meaning, look, so he says, listen, do you ever think about the fact that animals suffer so that you can eat them as food? He says, if you do think about the fact that animals suffer, what is going on in your brain that makes it ethically okay for you to eat them anyway? And then he says, maybe you don't think about this. Maybe you think all this stuff, this stupid, boring philosophy, this fatuous navel gazing, that sort of useless thinking about yourself and your thoughts. And he says, if you don't think about this stuff, he says, what makes it okay not to think about it? Like, if you just think it's stupid, like, don't think these thoughts. This kind of philosophy is a waste of time. He says, what makes you think it's okay to just ignore all these questions? And he says, and if you do think, so his real question is your refusal to think about these questions? He says, is your refusal because you've thought about it and decided you don't want to think about it? Or is it just you don't care and you don't want to think about it at all and you never thought about it? Is your refusal to think about any of this the product of actual thought, or is it just you don't want to think about it? And he says, and if it is that you don't want to think about it, why not? Why don't you want to think about it? Like, answer the question. Why don't you want to think about it? He says, do you ever think about the reasons why you don't want to think about it? So he asks you a bunch of questions here. And I would ask you at home. I would make you do it in groups if I had you in front of me. I miss you all so much. He's asked you a bunch of questions. I would like you to answer him. In the comments to this post, please provide answers to these questions. If you answer these questions in the post, it is going to make your paper 4 so much easier. So I'm going to ask him again. Number 1, do you ever think about how animals suffer so that you can eat food? Number 2, how do you explain to yourself why it's okay that animals suffer so you can eat food? Like, how are you okay with that? Like, what story do you tell yourself? What reasons, right? What reasons do you have for believing it's okay that animals suffer so you can enjoy eating food? Number 3, if you think this whole conversation is stupid, what makes it? Explain why it's okay to just refuse to think about this stuff? Like, is there a reason why you don't want to think about it? Or do you just don't want to think about it? You don't care. There's no reason. You just refuse. And if you're just refusing to think about it, why? Why do you refuse to think about it? Um, do you ever think about why you don't want to think about it? So those are the questions I would like you to answer. Put them in the comments below. They're really good questions. David Foster Wallace asks some really powerful, really serious questions here. They're big questions. And I really like them, and I was really pleased to get an opportunity to teach David Foster Wallace to you guys. If you're interested in David Foster Wallace, there is a great movie available. I think it's on Netflix. It's called The End of the Tour, and it is a movie about David Foster Wallace's life. And it's kind of fantastic, and I really do recommend it. If you'd like to get some more information about David Foster Wallace, I highly recommend you watch this movie, The End of the Tour. And it's about a journalist for Rolling Stone magazine who travels around with David Foster Wallace for a couple of weeks to learn about him. And he's a really, really interesting guy. So, okay, guys, I think we're done with David Foster Wallace. That means we only have one more thing to do before the end of the semester, which is look at the other essay about food by a guy named Michael Pollan. So we will cover that next time. I hope you guys are doing well out there. I love you all, and I hope you're okay. It's a crazy time. You probably already got paper 1 to me. Some of you have turned in paper 2 already. Paper 3, I handed out before the semester ended, but if you don't have it, email me. I'll email it to you. And read this and think about it for paper 4. And declare your classes credit, no credit when you get the chance. I don't know if that's up on CUNY First yet, but it will be. Read the blog, comment on the blog. I hope you guys are doing okay out there. It's a crazy time to be alive. Oh my God, I really don't want to teach online next semester. I'm going to cry. If they tell me I have to teach online in the fall, I'm going to fucking cry. Okay.